Hey everybody, it's Mr. Magic. We're back today with another Commander deck tech, and this time we'll be looking at Jhoira the Weatherlight Captain. This is one of the first decks that I purchased after getting back into Magic about a year ago, and when I got it, at the time that I got it, I was pretty underwhelmed. I sat down to play it a few times and I thought to myself, you know what, I can play a ton of artifacts, but then what? There was no kill con. There was no way to win the game. I could draw a lot of cards and I could play a lot of artifacts, but there was just nothing to pound my opponent in the face. Now that being said, this was like, the list that I got was like a $50 price range. And at this point, after the, well, sorry. Let me get things in order. So being underwhelmed, Jhoira sat on the shelf for a long time, and I just didn't enjoy playing it because there was no way to win. It didn't matter how good a player I was if there was just no way to win. But as about a year went by and I learned or relearned more of the card base in Magic, and I collected more cards, and I thought to myself, you know what, I could revisit Jhoira, and I think I could do some pretty unpleasant things to my opponents with Jhoira. So I came back to the deck and I looked at how Jhoira was being played, especially in light of the new way that I was starting to play Commander. And so what I have here is Jhoira Turbo Steel. It's all artifacts. It's play it as fast as you can. This construction is looking to win on turn 2 or turn 3 usually, and it is just blindingly, bleedingly fast. So the price point is also very, very different than the $50 target that I started with. We're looking at anywhere between $800 and $1,000 in represented here in this, and so it's just a very, very different creature at this point. And I've broken this down into Jhoira, of course, is by herself, and then we have 6 different categories for our cards. We've got our mana base, or our lands rather. We have our utility artifacts, these are our mana artifacts. This is our bounce package. Our card draw, apart from Jhoira, because she is a card draw engine in herself. And then we have our win cons, and then we have some utility artifacts. So let's start with Jhoira. Let's take a look at her. She is red, blue, and 2, a legendary human artificer, and she says whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card. So when we're looking at competitive EDH, and we're asking, is this a good commander, or is this potentially a good commander, we always want to ask 3 questions. We want to say, is it cheap? Like 4 mana, yes, Jhoira's cheap. Is she a combo piece? Potentially. Is she card draw? And Jhoira is absolutely card draw. She is card draw on crack cocaine. She is just fast card draw. She's fast card draw and she's free card draw. So Jhoira is about to get broken. But before we get into that, let's take a look at our mana base. I run a command tower, Dark Steel Citadel. We've got Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, which can tap to add gray, or it can tap to add double gray, and you spend this only to cast colorless spells, and only if you control 7 or more lands. I've got Tolarian Academy here, which is banned, I know, but it's okay with my play group. Sort of the rule in my play group is until Zakama is banned, we don't care about the ban list. That's our joke. And anyway, so Tolarian Academy taps to add blue to your mana pool for each artifact you control. Cascade Bluffs adds gray, or it can color fix. If you have red or blue, it can tap to add any combination of red and blue. Shivan Reef is a pain land, taps to add gray, or it can add blue or red and deal a damage to you. We have 7 mountains, and we have 11 islands. 11 islands, and that wraps up our land base. And the land base in this deck is thin. And usually I'm like 33 lands, and I'm pretty diligent on that, but there are some exceptions. Jhoira runs far fewer than that, and with very specific reasons. And my Tatiova deck, for example, runs a lot more. My Tatiova deck runs 76 lands. So I'm over double my normal land allotment in Tatiova. So in a minute, we're going to take a look at why I run so few lands. This is our mana base besides the lands, and it's thick. So first I'll say, as a caveat, that there are some expensive cards proxied, like that in grayscale. Proxied in grayscale here. And I'm just going to take a moment to validate those. I do own a Mana Crypt, signed by Mark Tedden, so very cool. I've got Mox Amber, I've got Mox Opal, I've got Mox Chrome, and I have, of course, Urza Lord High Artificer. But we'll run into those in a moment. We'll start with Inspiring Sanctuary, which costs 3, and says non-artifact spells you cast have Improvise. So your artifacts can help cast those spells. And the way that might work is that the artifact taps for 1. So let's imagine for a moment that I have 4 artifacts on the field, like this. And we'll pretend also that I have 2 islands. And that I want to play my Broodstar. Broodstar is blue, and 8 with affinity for artifacts. So since I have 4 artifacts, he costs 4 less. But then my artifacts can also tap with this Improvise mechanic to essentially add another gray. So now I have the gray cost covered, and I have only the blue to pay. And there I have my Broodstar, which I actually only paid 2 mana for. So, hooray, Broodstar, hooray, Improvise. So we have our Inspiring Sanctuary, which is a very, very good card. Then we have Foundry Inspector. Artifact spells you cast cost gray less to cast. Helm of Awakening for 2, and all spells cost 1 generic mana less to cast. Now this affects your opponent as well. This is a global artifact, but Jhoira is going to run so fast that you don't even really care. Ethereum Sculptor is blue and 1. Artifact creature, Vidalcan Artificer. Artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. The Herald of Kozilek is red-blue 1. He has Devoid. And colorless spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, so you can probably see a trend here. Chief Engineer is blue and 1. He's a Vidalcan Artificer as well. Says artifact spells you cast have Convoke. And your creatures, so your creatures can help cast your artifact spells in the same way that your artifacts could help cast your non-artifacts with Improvise. Improvise and Convoke are complementary skills, or rules texts. I'm not sure. Jhoira's Familiar is 4, has Flying, and says historic spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So that's artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. Well, That's fantastic. Mannequin costs 2 and taps to add 1. Or taps to add gray. Iron Mirror costs 2 and taps to add red. Silver Mirror costs 2, taps to add blue. Palladium Mirror costs 3 and taps to add double gray. Urza Lord High Artificer. Now Urza is just a beast in his own right. He's blue and 2. When he enters the battlefield, you create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. Tap an untapped artifact you control and add blue. So one of the cool things Urza can do, Urza's on the field and I play my Palladium Mirror. Now, usually because of summoning sickness, I can't tap my Palladium Mirror for 2, but Urza can tap the Palladium Mirror for blue. So I can squeeze mana even out of my artifact creatures because Urza is tapping it. It is not tapping itself. So that's a very useful feature out of Urza. Next comes Birgi, the God of Storytelling. Whenever you cast a spell, add red, and until the end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. And she has a text about allowing your creatures to boast twice, but that's not a relevant mechanic in this deck. What we do is we squeeze lots and lots of red mana out of Birgi, and we use that to help us perpetuate our storm. Next, Soul Talisman, which comes in with suspend counters on it, and I don't think I've ever gotten to the point that I'm actually able to bring it from exile into play, but the point is that I get the cast. The cast is just 1, and usually it ends up being free. And that's the important part. That's what I'm going for in that Soul Talisman. I have a Jeweled Lotus. It was not among these. The only Jeweled Lotus I own is part of a completed set of Commander Legends, and it is in a binder. I have some still shots of that I will add to the video to substantiate my Jeweled Lotus. So Jeweled Lotus costs 0 and says tap it and sack it, add 3 mana of any one color, spend this mana only to cast your commander. So you can ring out a turn 1 Jhoira if you drew Jeweled Lotus and really any land. Jeweled Lotus and any land is a turn 1 Jhoira. Lotus Petal, tap it, sack it, add 1 mana of any color. It's functionally a treasure token from way back in Tempest when there weren't treasure tokens. Cold Steel Heart costs 2, enters tapped, and when it enters, you choose a color. Then you tap it and add 1 mana of the chosen color to your mana pool. Usually, if you drop it turn 1, and that can happen, then you might get some mana out of it, but usually you're just getting the card draw off Jhoira with your Cold Steel Heart. A Chromatic Sphere costs 1, and it's a color fixer. 1 and tap it, sack it, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and draw a card. It's really the card draw more than anything else. That's why Chromatic Sphere is in here. But it can color fix you, though I've never needed it. Mox Tanalite costs 0, comes in with suspend counters. Same deal as Soul Talisman from before. There they are. I never get to the point of taking off all the suspend counters, but I do get the artifact cast, and that's the important part. Mind Stone costs 2. The other important thing to remember is that a lot of these artifacts are costing 2 and 3, and usually you've got Vidalcan, you've got the Chief Engineer, and the Ethereum Sculptor, and the Jorva's Familiar, and whatever else on the field, and Helm of Awakening, and your artifacts cost nothing to cast. That's usually where you're at. You're casting artifacts as fast as you can draw them. But Mind Stone costs 2, taps to add gray, or pay 1, tap it, sack it, draw a card. Card draw. That's really what Mind Stone is in here for. And then of course the Mana Crypt, the Opal, the Chrome, the Amber. Oh, sorry. I should actually go through these. My apologies. Mana Crypt costs 0, and during your upkeep, flip a coin. The opponent calls heads or tails while coin is in the air. If the flip ends up in the opponent's favor, Mana Crypt deals 3 damage to you, and then it has tap, add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool, play this ability as an interrupt. Mox Opal costs 0 and has Metalcraft. Add 1 mana of any color, activate this ability only if you control 3 or more artifacts. Mox Chrome has Imprint, and when Mox Chrome enters the battlefield, you may exile a non-artifact, non-land card from your hand. Tap to add 1 mana of any of the exiled card's colors. Mox Amber costs 0, and has tap to add 1 mana of any color among legendary creatures and planeswalkers you control. Prophetic Prism costs 2. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. That's the fantastic part. That's really why it's in here. And you add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Everflowing Chalice costs 0 with multi-kicker of 2. Enters the battlefield with a number of charge counters equal to the number of times it was kicked. So if you pay 2, then it gets 1 counter, pay 4, it gets 2 counters, etc. And then you tap it to add 1 gray to your mana pool for each charge counter on Everflowing Chalice. And sometimes I've cast Everflowing Chalice for 0 and don't kick it at all and get no counters, but I get the card draw of Jhoira, and that was crucial to me. Thought Vessel costs 2, no max hand size, that's its real reason, and then taps to add gray. Arcane Signet, tap to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity, costs 2, usually we'll play it for free. Most of these artifacts we're going to play for free. Izzet Signet costs 2, pay 1, tap it, add blue-red to your mana pool. Pillar of Origin costs 2, and as it enters, you choose a creature type. I usually choose Construct for the sake of the Metalwork Colossus and Urza's artifact token that he creates. Tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type. Prismatic Lens, add gray, or pay 1, tap it, add 1 mana of any color, so that becomes a color fixer. Soul Ring costs 1, tap to add double gray. And finally, Felwar Stone costs 2, tap to add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. And that's our mana base, and it's huge. And you can see why with a steel mana base that large and so efficient at reducing the casting cost, we really don't need very many lands. But it is a very unique case, and I don't advise running so few lands in very many other deck archetypes. So let's take a look at our card draw. What we have here is supplemental card draw. You know, we have Prophetic Prism, Mindstone, Chromatic Sphere. We looked at those. Those are going to be sort of occasional card draw. You know, like if Jhoira starts to whiff, or if the deck is just if the deck just kind of got stuck for a minute, then something like Prophetic Prism can help give it the kick that it needs to get back going again. And that's something that you'll notice as you get in the habit of playing your own Jhoira deck, that sometimes Jhoira will feel like she's going to get going, and you'll draw 6 or 7 cards, and you'll drop 6 or 7 artifacts, and then you'll hit 3 or 4 lands in a row, and now you're out of draw triggers, and you have to end your turn. And so learning to pace, or learning how this deck paces itself, and what you can do to stack draw triggers in order to carry you through those clumps of land in your deck, that's very, very helpful. So Sensei's Divining Top costs 1, and I have one in the mail. So it's not here yet, but it's paid for. Sensei's Divining Top costs 1. You can pay 1 to look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put them back in any order. Then draw a card, and then put Sensei's Divining Top on top of its owner's library. So we're pretty much always going to pay 0 for the Divining Top because of our artifact reduction base. And we put ourselves in a situation where we can play, and then just for playing Sensei's Divining Top, we get a draw trigger off Jhoira, but we can tap the Divining Top in response to it entering the battlefield, or in response to Jhoira's trigger, and allow ourselves to look at the top 3 cards of the library, put them back in any order, then resolve Jhoira's draw trigger. We can pay the 1 to do that, or we can tap to draw a card and put Sensei's Divining Top back on top of the owner's library. And so if we play it, tap it, draw a card, and then put it back on top of the library, then let the Jhoira trigger resolve, Jhoira guarantees to draw us the Sensei's Divining Top. And so if you can get Sensei's Divining Top going with Jhoira, then you can guarantee that you always have an artifact on top of your deck to draw. It's always going to be Sensei's Divining Top. So that's money right there. The reality chip is blue and 1. By the way, on this note, I'm going to dig out an Urza's Saga. I have several in one of my binders. I'm going to dig out an Urza's Saga and put into the mana base of this deck. I'll probably cut another island for the Urza's Saga, just because Urza's Saga will tutor for that Divining Top. Then we have the reality chip out of Neon Kamigawa, costs blue and 1. You may look at the top card of your library at any time, and as long as the reality chip is attached to a creature, you may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library, and it reconfigures for blue and 2. So if nothing else is working, you can invest the 5 mana and get the reality chip reconfigured, and then you can start playing lands and casting spells from the top of the library. Very, very useful mechanic. But you're usually not going to be in such a spot. By the time you have 5 mana to do stuff with, you're probably in quite a rhythm with this deck. Artificer's Assistant costs blue, has flying, and whenever you cast a historic spell, scry 1. So the useful thing to do with this is you've got Jhoira, and then you play Jhoira or an Artificer's Assistant on the field, and then you play some other artifact. Well, with the Artificer's Assistant, you resolve this trigger first. Always resolve this trigger first. That way you get to look at the top, you get to scry that top card, and you get to see, oh, is it an artifact, or is it not? Because I want to make sure that I have enough artifacts in my hand to keep playing off of Jhoira and to keep storming. That's the critical part. So always resolve that scry trigger first, so that you know, like if you scry that and you see it's a land, well, put that on the bottom. You don't want that. Get that land out of here. Ain't nobody got time for lands. Ichor Wellspring. When it enters the battlefield or is put in the graveyard, draw a card. Or graveyard from the battlefield, but draw a card. That's the important part. It's card draw. Alchemist Vial costs 2, and when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. So Ichor Wellspring and Alchemist Vial, again, these are occasional card draw. These are the kind of cards that you're going to hold in hand until you feel like, okay, Jhoira's starting to whiff. I need to, I need to do something with this. Riddlesmith says whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. I'm drawing 2 or 3 lands. Riddlesmith helps me pitch those lands in order to get another chance to draw an artifact. Very useful. Urza's Bauble costs 0. You sack it. You choose a card at random from target player's hand, look at that card, draw a card at the beginning of the next turn. We may or may not get to next turn. We might storm off this turn. The important part is we have a 0-drop artifact. Spellbook costs 0. No max hand size. Gotta love it. You're going to draw your whole deck. This deck will draw its entirety pretty much every time you play. Unless you're running up against like a Crick build that is just lightning fast, as fast or faster than you are, then you're going to draw your whole deck. Thoughtcast is blue and 4, but with affinity for artifacts, and then you draw 2 cards. You're pretty much always going to cast this for blue and you're going to draw 2 cards off of 1 blue mana. You gotta love that. Scrabbling Claws, target player exiles a card from their graveyard, or pay 1 and sack it. Exile target card from a graveyard and draw a card. So, somebody's got some graveyard recursion going on. It's probably not fast enough to deal with, to be a problem for you. But if it is, you can get rid of it. But the important part, again, is it's just a cheap artifact. It's another card draw trigger off Jhoira. Sabo's Web is a little bit of control in case this game lasts more than 2 turns. When it comes into play, you draw a card. That's important. And then lands with activated abilities that don't produce mana don't untap during their controller's untap steps. So, that's a... if your opponents have lands that are doing stuff besides mana, Sabo's Web shuts that down. That's nice. You gotta love it. Let's take a look at our bounce package. Now, this is what I call the bounce package. And this is, in the event that, like I said, that Jhoira is starting to whiff, that there's something going on with the pacing of the deck, that you've hit 3 or 4 lands, and it's like, okay, I need a way to draw more cards and get past this clump of lands. Well, Displacement Wave for blue, and X says return all non-land permanents with converted mana cost X or less to their owner's hands. So in your deck, there's not much that costs more than 4. So if you're at that point and you have the 6 mana to sink in this, you can bounce all of your non-land permanents. And then you can replay them cheap, because virtually all of your artifacts cost, next to nothing to cast. Retract for blue. Return all artifacts you control to their owner's hands. You need to make sure that you've got enough mana to replay the first couple of important ones. But once you've done that, you can replay out 20 or 30 artifacts. This is Hercule's Recall. It's smoked over because I'm not wild about the card art here. But it's blue 1, and it says all artifacts in play owned by target player are returned to target player's hand, and any enchantments on those artifacts are discarded. So, that's another bounce effect. That puts our artifacts back in our hands so that we can play them again, so that we can get more card draw off Jhoira. Our final bounce effect is Temporal Fissure for blue and 4. Return target permanent to its owner's hand, and it has Storm. So if you have played, say, 10 spells this turn, you can drop a Temporal Fissure and return 11 artifacts to your hand and play them all out again and draw 11 more cards. Or if you just want the panache and the flair in the thing, then you see that you're storming off just fine, thank you very much. You sink, you play 20 or 30 artifacts, you Temporal Fissure, and you return a ton of stuff to your opponent's hand. Mana Severance for blue and 1. Search your library for any number of land cards and remove them from the game. Shuffle your library afterwards. Ain't nobody got time for those pesky lands when we are trying to draw and play artifacts. That's what's up. So, then, we're going to take a quick look at our utility artifacts. I want to snatch up... There it is, Lightning Greaves. We have, of course, Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots. And that is all the protection that we are giving poor Jhoira. Her primary mode of protection is just her blistering pace. She is just so cotton picking fast. Nobody's got time to do anything to her. Nobody has time to establish a mana base to do anything to her. So, then Pithing Needle. As it enters the battlefield, choose a card name, and activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. Great way to shut down your opponent's commander. If they're doing something fast, so like say you are running up against a Crick build, just drop your Pithing Needle. Crick is not doing anything. Or whatever it is. Let's say they got Necropotence down. Necropotence requires paying life as an activation. shuts Necropotence down. Whatever it is that's your threat, you can throw Pithing Needle at it. Costs 1, you're almost never going to even pay the 1. Clock of Omens for 4. Tap 2 untapped artifacts you control and untap target artifacts. You have a lot of useful artifacts in this deck, and you have a lot that are not necessarily doing anything or don't even have a tap requirement to their activation cost. You can tap Clock of Omens as one of the 2 untapped artifacts to untap something else. Ornithopter costs 0 and has flying. It's free card draw. Pyrite Spellbomb costs 1. You can pay red to sack it and deal 2 damage to target creature or player, or you can pay 1 and sack it to draw a card. So it's potential card draw. Semblance Anvil costs 3 and has imprint. When it enters the battlefield, exile a non-land card from your hand. Spells you cast that share a card type with the exiled card cost 2 less to cast. Put an artifact on it. So Conjurer's Bauble for 1. Tap it, sacrifice it, put up to 1 target card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. Somebody countered a critical spell, somebody interfered with your storm and put a key combo piece into your graveyard, and you don't mind putting that back on the bottom of your library because you were going to draw your whole deck anyway. Library of Leng costs 1, and there's a lot of antiquated text here that amounts to you having no maximum hand size. But it says skip the discard phase of your turn. If a spell or effect forces you to discard, you may discard to the top of your library rather than to your graveyard. If the discard is random, you may look at the card before choosing where to discard it. So it's pretty cool stuff there. Mirror of the Forebears for 2. As it enters, choose a creature type. I usually go with Construct. Pay 1 until the end of turn. Mirror of the Forebears becomes a copy of target creature you control of the chosen type, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. Voyager's Staff for 1. Pay 2, sack it, exile target creature. Return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So let's say that maybe you want to flicker Urza. Maybe you're a turn out from being able to storm off, and you want 2 big hulking construct tokens. Well, flicker Urza and get yourself another construct token. Or maybe this is you're done storming, you got a ton of artifacts on the field, and you want your construct or your Plague Mirror or your Broodstar to connect for lethal damage. And by this point, your opponent they might have only 1 creature on the field. And you can make that happen with Voyager's Staff. You can get their stuff out of the way. No blockers. Tormod's Crypt for 0. Tap it and sack it. Exile all cards from target player's graveyard. And you shut down graveyard recursion decks that way. Plus you get free card draw off of that 0-drop artifact. Strionic Resonator costs 2. You pay 2, tap it, copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. Well, Jhoira says whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card, so that whenever right there is a keyword letting us know that her ability is a triggered ability. And if the Jhoira deck is starting to whiff, if you're drawing a lot of consecutive lands, Strionic Resonator is another way for you to squeeze out just 1 more card draw at a critical time. Or you can use it on Urza when he enters. Well, when is a triggered ability. Aetherflux Reservoir is a triggered ability. You can copy the life gain, and with Rings of Brighthearth that we'll come to in a minute, you can copy the pay 50 life effect. So Aether Spellbomb costs 1, pay blue, sack it, return target creature to its owner's hand, so that gets a blocker off the board so you can connect for lethal damage, or you pay 1, sack it, and draw a card. Can keep the deck going when you thought you might have whiffed out. Rings of Brighthearth for 3. Whenever you activate an ability, if it isn't a mana ability, you may pay 2. If you do copy that ability, you may choose new targets for the copy. So, let's say you've hit 55 life with your Aetherflux Reservoir, and you're storming off, and you've got a total of and you've got 4 mana left, but you only have the 55 life. Well, you can pay 50 life, go down to 5 life. The Aetherflux Reservoir deals 50 damage to target creature or player. Then you pay 2 and pay 2 to copy it twice, targeting your other 2 opponents, and you win the game, even though you only had the 50 life down. Then finally here, our last package is what I consider the kill cons. Aetherflux Reservoir is 4, and whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you cast this turn. Pay 50 life. Aetherflux Reservoir deals 50 damage to target creature or player. And learning to play this with Shimmermere is big. You can take whole tables this way, because Shimmermere costs 3 and has flash, and you may play artifact spells as though they had flash. So let's say that I've got Aetherflux Reservoir and Shimmermere on the table. Then I'm going to play a Sabo's Web, but before the Aetherflux Reservoir trigger resolves, I'm going to flash in a Scrabbling Claws, and before that resolves, I'm going to flash in a Spellbook, and before that trigger resolves, I'm going to flash in an Urza's Bauble, and before that trigger resolves, I'm going to flash in an Ichor Wellspring, and before that trigger resolves, an Alchemist's Vial, and then a Reality Chip, and then a Divining Top. You get the idea, but I'm flashing them in before the Aetherflux trigger can resolve. Then, and this is the important part, then when the Aetherflux triggers start to resolve, they don't go, you gain 1 life, you gain 2 more, you have 3 life, you gain 3 more, you have 6 life, you gain 4 more, you have 10 life. They resolve very differently. When you flash them in, the first trigger to resolve sees that you have cast 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spells this turn. So you gain 8 life. The second trigger to resolve says, oh, well, you played 8 spells this turn, now you're at 16 life. The third trigger says, oh, now you're at 24, and so you keep going until you get 64 life off of those 8 spells that you played. And that's huge, because if you played 15 artifacts, if you flashed in 15 artifacts, well, then you can gain 225 life, and that's enough to kill everybody at the table. So that's how you flash artifacts with Aetherflux Reservoir. Golem Foundry cost 3, says whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may put a charge counter on Golem Foundry. Remove 3 charge counters from the Golem Foundry and put a 3/3 colorless Golem artifact creature token onto the battlefield. So every 3 artifacts you play, you get a 3/3 Golem. And it is not unrealistic to play a total of 100 artifacts in this deck in the course of a game. And you can have 30 golems on the field. Brain Freeze is blue and 1. Target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into her graveyard, plus it has Storm. So if you've played 35 spells this turn, 35 artifacts, then you get 36 copies of Brain Freeze when you drop it. And that's enough to mill somebody completely out, even if they hadn't drawn their opening hand. You can win a game with Brain Freeze. Scattershot can become a board wipe. It's red and 2. Scattershot deals 1 damage to target creature, and it has Storm. My Krenko Mob Boss deck can and has pumped out 30 goblins by turn 3. It's fast enough to run up against Jhoira, but Scattershot can clear the board and let Jhoira swing in for lethal damage. Grape Shot is red and 1, deals 1 damage to any target with Storm. And so where it shines over Scattershot is first being cheaper and second being more versatile. Instead of to target creature, it's to any target. So you can target your opponent with Grape Shot. And yes, you can absolutely play 40 artifacts and ping somebody down to death with 40 copies of Great Shot. Plague Mirror costs 2, has Infect, so it damages creatures with -1/-1 counters, and damages players with poison counters. Plus, it taps to add gray to your mana pool. So there's nothing quite so fun, maybe, as putting Nettle Cyst. Nettle Cyst is 3 and has Living Weapon. When it enters, you create a black 0/0 Phyrexian Germ and attach Nettle Cyst to it. The equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact and/or enchantment you control, with an equip cost of 2. So, if you've got Plague Mirror plus Nettle Cyst plus 8 other artifacts, which is nothing in this deck, and you can connect, that's 10 poison counters. That's lethal damage to your opponent, right there, just off the Plague Mirror. Dinky little Plague Mirror. Metalwork Colossus costs 11, but he costs X less to cast, where X is the total converted mana cost of non-creature artifacts you control. And yes, you can drop Metalwork Colossus for free very often in this deck. Sack 2 artifacts, return Metalwork Colossus from your graveyard to your hand. You know, somebody gets rid of him, somebody counters him, somebody, you know, whatever. Well, he's coming right back, and you're probably still going to play him for free. Isochron Scepter costs 2, has Imprint. When it comes into play, you remove an instant card with converted mana cost 2 or less in your hand from the game. 2, and tap it. You may copy the imprinted instant card and may play the copy without paying its mana cost. So, in this deck, you typically put Dramatic Reversal, blue and 1, untap all non-land permanents you control. So you put blue and 1 on, or you put Dramatic Reversal on your Isochron Scepter. So you pay 2, so you tap all your mana rocks, you float in a lot of mana, then you pay 2 and tap your Isochron Scepter, well, to play a copy of Dramatic Reversal. Well, Isochron Scepter is a non-land permanent, so it untaps, as well as all your mana rocks. And now you have infinite mana. Final Fortune is another great one to put onto that Isochron Scepter, and that I will probably sub into this deck. It's red. It says take an extra turn after this one. At the end of that turn, you lose the game. But the way this works is that as long as during that extra turn you continue to tap down Isochron Scepter, then you are permitted to continue taking extra turns, and you don't actually lose because you take an extra turn, and well, I was going to lose, but now I'm going to take an extra turn, and then well, I was going to lose, but now I'm going to take an extra turn, and so it's infinite turns. Our final kill con and our final card is Broodstar. Blue and 8, affinity for artifacts, flying, you know, so you can drop it in usually for just blue. Has plenty of evasion, can get over and around your opponent's stuff, and its power and toughness are equal to the number of artifacts you control. And you can see how in this deck you can drop a ton of artifacts really fast and end up with a big Broodstar. You know, it's not uncommon to have a size 15 or a 20 Broodstar flying in at your opponent, and you paid 2 mana for it, and that just feels like breaking the game. And all your friends cry and go home, and nobody wants to play with you anymore. But you know, but I have a ton of fun with Jhoira. You know, some key components for you to learn and to remember is you're the storm player. It's your job to keep track of your storm count. You need to know how many spells you've played this turn, and you have a lot of triggers to keep up with, and a lot of card draws, and a lot of when this enters the battlefield, but it's still your job to keep up with it. So, you know, you need to learn the interactions in your deck. You need to practice by yourself, learning your cards, playing this out. You know, play some dummy hands, play it till you mill your opponent down with, you know, an imaginary opponent down with Brain Freeze. Play it until you beat somebody to death. You know, an imaginary opponent, beat them to death with the Grape Shot, or with the Ether Flux, or with the Broodstar, or whatever it is. You know, play that imaginary game down to the end so that you learn your cards. Then, now you've learned your cards, and you know that during your turn, you have to keep track of storm count. And so, that's you know, and the other thing is that if you've learned your cards and you know your deck, this deck can take a 15 or a 20-minute turn. And you need, and that's with you knowing what's going on. But if you're taking a lot of time to make decisions, this deck could take half-hour or hour-long turns, and nobody wants to sit around and watch you do that. You know, if you keep the pace fast and people can see, okay, well, you're doing stuff, you know, then maybe they're willing to sit through your very long turns. But it's important to let your opponents know what to expect. Some people like to play against storm decks. Some people like to play against this turbo stuff because they want to see, okay, am I faster than turbo steel? Or, you know, can I drop stacks enough to keep Jhoira from storming off? You know, those are questions that some players have, and they like the challenge. Other players will get bored because they just have no hope of interacting with the kind of speed that Jhoira can put down. So, know your deck, keep track of your storm count, and have the Rule Zero conversation. Talk to people about what this deck does, and have other things handy to play. So, that's my advice about Jhoira. I think Jhoira is a blast, and I encourage you guys to build a Jhoira deck. And, you know, put it up on Moxfield and link in the comments and show me what your Jhoira build looks like. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this. This is Mr. Magic. Have a fantastic day.